Come on up. Anna, Chris, Liz, Heather, Casey, Michelle. We are going to get right started. I'm Aurora Winslade. I'm the director of the Office of Sustainability at Stanford University. And it is my great pleasure to moderate this incredible panel on the future of climate. We're going to move to the next panel of climate risk, mitigation, adaptation, everything climate in California. So we're going to do a brief intro and then dive right in. So we'll just go in alphabetical order by first name. So Anna, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Ana Tabuena-Ruddy. I'm Assistant Director and Chief Sustainability Officer at Streets LA, where I currently oversee the Urban Forestry Division, which manages the largest municipal urban forest network in the nation. Prior to that, I was involved in securing grants for our bureau, where we successfully secured over $300 million of active transportation, stormwater capture, and urban greening grants. Thanks.
Chris.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Chris Helmer. I'm with the City of Imperial Beach. I'm the Environmental and Natural Resources Director. I've been down in the city for about 15 years, and we're located very south end of San Diego Bay and right up against the border with Mexico. So we have all sorts of little challenges, either with climate change, dealing with cross-border issues. So it's a really exciting place to be and happy to be here.
Heather.
I'm Heather Penning. I'm the Executive Officer of Sustainability Policy at LA Metro. LA Metro is the transportation authority serving Los Angeles County, providing up to 1 million rides per day. We provide bus, train, micromobility, and other services. Thank you.
Casey.
Hi, everyone. Thank you. I'm Casey. I'm the supervisor of the Renewable Fuels Unit in the California Energy Commission's Energy Research and Development Division. And so our division is focused on funding clean energy technology innovations from the applied research stage all the way to early deployment. And other CEC-wide responsibilities include advancing renewable energy and transforming transportation. So, thank you.
Liz.
Good morning. I'm Liz Crossan. I'm the Chief Sustainability, Resilience, and Innovation Officer for Metropolitan Water District of Southern California. We're the largest water wholesaler in the nation. We serve 19 million Southern Californians with drinking water through our 26 member agencies. And we primarily have done that historically through 2 imported water sources through the Bay Delta and the Colorado River. And we are increasingly looking more at local and regional water supplies in our efforts to build climate resilience.
And Michelle.
Hi, I'm Michelle Stewart. I'm the Senior Manager of Special Projects working at Metrolink. And my focus has been on fleet and facilities modernization as we prepare to transition to zero emissions. Last year, Metrolink was able to transition its entire diesel, non-revenue, and revenue vehicle fleet to renewable diesel. So we view that as a really critical step in the right direction to trying to reduce our overall emissions. We're also working on projects to turn over our older diesel locomotive fleet to cleaner diesel. And then, of course, ultimately, we want to get to zero. And it's a big project and a heavy lift.
So I'm going to start with a few opening questions for our panelists. I want to invite you all to chime in if you have a response that you'd like to join. Some of the themes that came up in our planning call, and as I was looking over the bios and the work of these amazing panelists that I hope we'll touch on, are interagency collaboration. Many of these wonderful people already are working together. Their agencies are working together. These are complex problems. They require complex solutions. They require a lot of money. So we're looking forward to hearing from Casey at the California Energy Commission around the funding opportunities and the funding needs, how we balance mitigation and adaptation and integrate equity into the discussion, and the planning ahead that it requires, the public engagement, the adaptive decision-making. So let's start with Ana. What are your goals for the City of Los Angeles' Urban Forestry Division, which manages the largest urban forest in the nation, largest municipal urban forest in the nation?
Thanks, Aurora. My goal for Urban Forestry Division is to make sure that everyone sees green infrastructure as real infrastructure and integrate them into all of our projects, especially active transportation projects. You know, many times the public right-of-way is the most constrained space to design. There's a lot of competition for space in the public right-of-way. We have bike infrastructure, we have buses, we have cars, we have pedestrians, and utilities, lots of utilities. And so carving out space for trees is very difficult. And so I'm encouraging everyone to just be creative about where and what they do with the type of infrastructure design that they do. So for example, with bike infrastructure, you know, there's different ways to accommodate that. It could be by the curb with a class 4 cycle track, or it could be widening the sidewalk and putting the bike lanes on the sidewalk. This allows for bigger trees there, or even putting trees in medians where there's also bike infrastructure in the medians. Currently at Streets LA, we have all these different types of bike infrastructure projects through the active transportation grants that we won. We have the sidewalk widening, we have the typical class 4 cycle track, we have the bike lanes in the medians, and these different types allows for different ways to accommodate trees. Another thing that we're working on is an urban forestry permit fee study so that we can integrate the cost impacts, public health and environmental impacts of removing trees. Currently, we're faced with a lot of tree removals, and so we're trying to promote tree preservation, and a way to do that is for folks to see trees as being difficult to remove, such as like power poles or a fire hydrant or storm drain, to start looking at trees as this kind of a substantial green infrastructure. There's so much more, but I know there's other folks here in the panel that needs to speak about their programs. Thank you.
Value for the trees and costs to remove. Think of it as a financial resource. So moving from the city of LA to the city of Imperial Beach, Chris, can you talk to us about how, as a low-lying city, is your community experiencing, I know you're experiencing coastal flooding, so how are you planning to adapt to that?
Yeah, so Imperial Beach, we're surrounded by 3 sides by water. You know, we got the Tijuana Estuary, the San Diego Bay, and the Pacific Ocean. And we're already experiencing, you know, during king tides, you know, the high tides of the year, waves overtopping our beachfront and on each of our estuary sides. What happens is when you have an El Nino event, you know, the surface waters get warmer around here in Southern California, and you have this thermal expansion of water, and that adds, you know, 8 to 10 inches of additional sea level rise. A lot of people don't realize that just here in El Nino. So if you're hearing the news about pending El Ninos, or there's an El Nino pending in the Pacific, well, that perks up our attention here in our city, because we know during those years, we're already experiencing flooding. So theoretically, another foot on top of that, in addition to the larger storms that we get, we end up seeing waves, damage, flooding of our streets on 3 sides. So when we're actively dealing with, you know, climate adaptation right now in our community, and looking ahead to potentially a you know, an El Nino winter, where we're planning ahead of like what can we do. So we got partnerships with we try to reach partners with the many folks we can. I'll probably talk about it later, but we have a flood alert system with the Scripps Institute of Oceanography, and then we're actually actively trying to plan some projects that actually raises, you know, essentially making levees around certain parts of our city. And those are very challenging things to do, because it goes across multiple jurisdictions, properties. This is, you know, adaptation in action, which is, you know, doing things differently, getting permits from the resource agencies that require consideration differently from traditional infrastructure projects. And we're trying to, you know, break the grounds here in Imperial Beach on how can you build some of these adaptation projects. And at the end of the day, the construction part is easy. It's going through the planning and the permitting process is what takes an insane amount of time, and is really the challenge that we're facing.
Thanks, Chris. So, Liz, I know you already have a robust climate action plan, and you're doing a lot of planning around adaptation. Can you tell us a little bit more about that?
Sure. Yeah. So Metropolitan Water District, the board of directors approved a climate action plan last year, which charts out our path to reducing our greenhouse gas emissions to reach carbon neutrality by 2045. And probably no surprise that around 90% of Metropolitan's emissions really come from our electricity use. It takes a lot of power to move water around, treat water. And so that has been a major focus of ours, of looking for ways that we can green, make decisions in where we purchase our energy, as well as build our own green energy in order to reduce our emissions there. And then looking internally in our fleet, our facilities, and other ways that we can reduce our emissions in-house. And really, this is not something that was required by the state for Metropolitan to do. It was a leadership moment for the water agency to really say, not only do we need to adapt to climate change, but we need to be part of the solution and do what we can to reduce the impacts overall. And so while we are working on the reduction of emissions, we are also embarking this year on a climate adaptation master planning process, which is, our integrated resource plan, but plus really focused on addressing our resources through a climate lens, acknowledging that the impacts that we're seeing, whether that's 3 years of the driest hydrological cycles on record versus, a dozen atmospheric rivers in Southern California, that we are looking to build infrastructure that can adapt and not only survive but thrive in these changing conditions.
Thanks, Liz. And building on that, Heather, you've also been working on both mitigation and defining and planning for adaptation. Tell us what you've been doing.
I think a number of us working in this space are finding that, we went from talking about sustainability and kind of greening things and looking at ways to mitigate kind of climate emissions to suddenly we're already seeing really the effects of climate change. And now we're talking about adaptation, and it feels like we're already very much behind the curve. And I feel like that that sort of transition has happened within the space of under a decade, right? So in terms of transportation, I think we still have a lot of work within the transportation community to define what climate change looks like in transportation. So we've done work recently. I mean, this is on top of our climate action plan that our board adopted in 2019, which talked a lot about emissions, but we're really looking now at like our vulnerabilities. So, I mean, just if you take as an example, light rail at LA Metro and the vulnerabilities, the first one being, that of safety and comfort of passengers, making sure that they have shelter, making sure that they have shade. Sagging catenaries is something that happens over 102 degrees. So extreme heat, rail buckling as well with extreme heat. Looking at pavement buckling, obviously in California, between the wildfires and the extreme heat, we have grid reliability issues. So looking at what happens if the grid goes down and the signals go out and the power goes out, and how can we run our light rail trains and our subways, and increasingly we're in the process of transitioning our 2,000 buses to EVs. And so looking at all of these issues, I think still really trying to define what are the areas of focus for us in transportation. There's starting to be money for that. There's a program called the LTCAP, the Local Transportation Climate Adaptation Program, through the CTC at the state, that's taking the federal PROTECT money from the infrastructure bill and packaging that with state money to specifically address climate change in transportation. So we at Metro were applying for, recently our tunnel at Union Station flooded, and folks couldn't get to their trains. So we're looking at addressing the flooding in Union Station, applying for that program. And so these are just some of the challenges that we're dealing with.
Thanks, Heather. I know one of the things we've looked at Stanford is the historical inputs to our models, whether it's engineering models or for buildings or for planning, transportation, they no longer are valid. But if you take the big climate models, you can't apply them on a micro scale. So it's very detailed definitions and planning at a micro scale. That's complicated before you even get to the planning stage. So this is work that it sounds like all of you are doing. So Michelle, you have a climate vulnerability assessment and adaptation plan. Tell us, how are you doing this work?
Well, so I think this really sort of piggybacks on what Heather was saying. I mean, I think many in the room are likely aware of the landslide that sort of impacted both Amtrak, Low-San, and then also Metrolink service through San Clemente. And so that was really, I think, an example where we saw up close, the impacts that that climate change are having really on our system. And because Metrolink is such a vast network, as Chris Haskell, my colleague, had shown in his presentation, it's 547 route miles. We cover such a large area through 5 counties that there are a lot of areas where we're potentially vulnerable, not only to like what Heather mentioned about extreme heat. That impacts. We have speed restrictions in the summer months when we do hit really high temperatures. There may be areas that could be vulnerable to flooding going forward. And then certainly, of course, San Clemente is the perfect example of where we are vulnerable to sea level rise and then also just sort of movement of land in general. So the climate vulnerability study really looked at trying to sort of inventory all of those various issues and to look at potential mitigations. It is available on our website, so if anyone wants some light reading, it is something that you can peruse.
Great, thanks. So we have in many of these a theme of needing, applying for. Many of you have received substantial funding. So Casey, can you tell us a little bit about what are some of the current funding opportunities aimed towards reaching California's goals of reducing greenhouse gas emissions, of transitioning us to a carbon neutral future? And also, if you might touch on, what do you think some of the funding needs are that are coming down the pipe?
Yeah, and happy to hear more about funding needs so we can be informed in our funding investment plans for the future.
So we'll let people respond.
Yeah, so it is helpful to hear about what everyone else's needs are, so happy to connect after the panel. But at the California Energy Commission, we do administer the electric program and investment charge, and so every year that includes $150 million, and that's separate from all the federal funding. And so the goal of that is to increase grid stability, increase overall generation, and in an equitable way. And so in addition to that, we also have our gas research and development plan, and that's about $24 million a year as well. And right now that one's focused on hydrogen production and end uses, and also gas system decommissioning, also focusing on indoor air quality for that have developed health issues for residential gas usage. And we also have future funding for long duration energy storage, focus, and also energy efficiency upgrades for food production and facilities, and also clean hydrogen production and end use there. So that's a big set. We also have the Clean Transportation Program out of our Fuels and Transportation division. And so they provide up to $100 million per year from anything from light, medium, and heavy duty infrastructure. So that's, vehicle infrastructure and also charging infrastructure. And lately we've been having some funding opportunities for hydrogen refueling infrastructure as well. And there are efforts there for workforce development and other opportunities like making sure there's signage up for EVs so that people are aware of it. So making sure that we have the stakeholder engagement there and making sure that we do this all in an equitable way are important things for us as well.
Anyone want to chime in on what you see as the big funding needs to move this climate adaptation work forward? Anna?
Earlier at the first panel, I was really happy to hear Hillary Norton mention that a lot of the funding are just focused on specific goals, whether it's just active transportation or just stormwater or just greening. And to be able to align all those grant milestones together would really help us out in achieving a multi-benefit project, like a real multi-benefit project, where I think right now the challenge is sometimes we're just looking at active transportation, though, it would need stormwater capture elements in it or urban greening, and we're not even talking about placemaking yet, which is, at Streets LA, whenever we go out there and meet with the community, it's always 4 things that they want to see. They want to see active transportation, they want to see stormwater capture, they want to see urban greening, and they want to see placemaking. In order to provide that holistic big vision that the community has, we literally have to apply for different grants just to put that together. And doing that is very challenging because all those grants have different grant milestones. And so if you need to put something in the substructure, you have to think about, the sequence of construction, which all of you are familiar with. And that's challenging when you have different grant sources. And so I think for me, I would personally want to see either a grant funding that does all those things together, or for all those grant programs to talk to each other and align their deadlines together so we can easily deliver these projects to the community.
Heather?
Thanks.
I'm not sure how much most public agencies are actively grappling with their level of risk when it comes to climate change. Probably the same for most private organizations. And as we know, the risk is the greatest to communities that are already impacted. I think that if we really started from a place of risk, we would discover that much more funding is needed than what is currently available, specifically to address climate change adaptation and all of the sort of redoing. It's going to involve redoing a lot of our systems, re-engineering as you suggested.
And Liz, I wonder if you could speak to anything you want to add here, and also to the question of the interagency collaboration that's really necessary to build these complex responses that are required.
Yeah, the way Metropolitan is set up as this, state established cooperative of 26 member agencies, and even some of those agencies are wholesalers with their own member agencies. So it really is this complex set of different entities that really represent and serve a hugely diverse population in Southern California. So it's, as we are doing our own sort of vulnerability and risk assessment, really trying to look at the geographical diversity, the community diversity, to really understand what the specific vulnerabilities are in different parts of our service area is critical, and that really requires working with those agencies that are on the ground, that are retail agencies that are working directly with their customers to really understand what those true risks are. And to build a little bit on Heather's point too, when we're thinking about these large infrastructure investments, and really trying to focus in on communities that have been underserved in the past, we're going to have, you've heard it, we're having this big building boom, but we're going to have a serious affordability issue as a result. And so when we think about these big investments and we think about the funding needs that we have, to really try to identify strategies for protecting our most vulnerable communities and ensuring that we're thinking about the affordability downstream as we're making these investments, I think is a big piece.
Chris, how are you thinking about these increasing extreme weather events and that balance of the risk, the cost, the vulnerability, low-income communities in the city of Imperial Beach?
At the end of the day, I'm hearing, everything is important. We got to modernize our transportation system. We got to modernize our flood control systems. We got to maintain our existing infrastructure. All these things are all the things that come down at a local agency. I'm over at Public Works, and I don't want to feel like I'm overwhelmed, but sometimes everything is a priority right now, and everything needs to be focused. And the one thing that I'm hearing as a benefit, everyone's talking about these multi-benefit projects, these complete street projects. Those are the ones that need to start happening more. And I'll tell you just from my own perspective here, being for more than a decade, the first things that get cut out of any project is the stuff that's underground that no one sees, and often, if you're in engineering, the stuff that's underground is stuff that's the most important. So I'm really encouraged to hear all these, multi-benefit stuff and linking these funding resources to not just doing one aspect of whatever your profession is on here, but trying to pull everything into it. And when that comes down to an Imperial Beach, I'm trying to stay open-minded to all these projects. So we have some serious challenges, and I'll just call out one project is we're doing the Bayshore Bikeway Resiliency Project that I'm trying to raise up a section of our bike path that then protects an underserved neighborhood from current and natural future flooding that we're going to have. I mean, it's a very simple thing to do, and we got a bunch of public land that's allowed to do it, but going over, Fish and Wildlife land, and the City of San Diego land, and railroad easements, and Caltrans land, all these things just all of a sudden compounds like a really simple project into something that's really going to take 5 years of planning to do a 8-month construction project. That's a frustration that I have on my end, that I'm trying to change the way that projects are developed and delivered. I think the way that we have these meetings here, where you talk to the varied interests, and everyone can understand, on the ground at a local agency, like what are the challenges for someone small like Imperial Beach? Why is it so hard for us to move forward with these projects? But no, I think this is great that we're here talking about some multi-benefit projects.
So, Michelle, can you expand on the challenges of working interagency that you see, and what are some of the ways of overcoming those challenges?
So certainly from the perspective of advancing zero emissions, we've really seen partnerships with other agencies, and in particular, a lot of leadership through Caltrans to try to advance pilots. Rail zero emissions, aside from, of course, electrification, is nowhere near where the bus industry has gotten to, but we also have the benefit of being able to look back and sort of assess the lessons learned of the bus sort of zero emissions transition. And with that, what we see is that partnering with others and not going it alone is going to be really critical, because rail is incredibly expensive, and new rail vehicles, especially because passenger rail is such a niche market, each rail vehicle, especially for a demonstration, could be upwards of $30 million just to sort of get that vehicle. So that, creates really big challenges, especially for, passenger rail agencies who've been heavily impacted from these sort of changing commute patterns. We're sort of trying to address that issue on one hand, while also ensuring that we do prepare for the future and we do look at zero emissions. And so really the partnerships and the collaboration that we've been able to have with other agencies, and again, namely Caltrans has really taken a leadership role in helping to try to get a lot of the different commuter rail, passenger rail agencies within the state to talk to each other and have sort of regular meetings to sort of discuss different advancements that are happening in the industry, but then also they've been able to secure funding for demonstration as well that we're hoping to be able to participate in. So thus far, it's actually been really positive as far as working through, our peers, and then also with Caltrans. Certainly as we sort of advance this effort, I'm sure there will be complexity that will be introduced, but at least right now in the sort of planning stage and the sort of funding advocacy stage, it's been, very, very positive. We're very happy to be part of that discussion.
Thanks. And Casey, do you want to tell us about a couple of the specific programs at the California Energy Commission that you think support some of the initiatives that we've heard about from our panelists?
Yeah, I think a big one that we've been working on is storage. So especially when the grid goes down, what are we going to do? And I think Heather mentioned that. And one thing that we've been working towards is storage. And so we do have a long duration energy storage as well. And how can we pair renewables with batteries and such so that we can continue if our grid does go down? And so things like that are hoping to increase our grid stability. And also we have initiatives for load flexibility as well. So how can we shift the load so that it's not as impacted when everyone else is using the energy? So that's one thing. And the big one that my team is working on right now is clean hydrogen. And we kind of mentioned that here and there, but we are looking to invest in clean hydrogen production technologies and how that will look, processing, delivery, end use. And so we have $100 million there as well. And so it's kind of the start of the hydrogen production work for us, but we also have some work in in low carbon fuels, and also the fuels and transportation division that I mentioned is investing in demonstration commercial scale of production facilities using forest biomass. So hoping that that contributes to reducing wildfire risk. And so considering the risk there is really important as we are in California. And so that's one thing. Another thing is smarter EV chargers. So ways that we can help the EVs charging infrastructure is in the research and development stage is how can we do faster charging, and also deploying those hydrogen refueling stations and making sure that they're publicly accessible are things that we are largely focused on, and really hoping to do that all equitably. And so one thing that all of our funding opportunities have is focuses on how we can provide these benefits to under-resourced communities. And you know, we've heard that is really important to everyone as we want to move forward as a whole, especially for those under-resourced communities.
Thanks, Casey. So Casey, you mentioned shifting electricity, storage, a lot on how we can get to cleaner sources of fuel. So Michelle, or actually Liz, I know that you are doing a lot to look in the Metropolitan Water District at shifting electricity storage. Can you tell us a little bit more about your work there? And by the way, your title, Chief Sustainability, Resilience, and Innovation Officer, that is one of the coolest job titles I've ever heard.
Thanks. That credit goes to my general manager. So, you know, as I mentioned, the vast majority of our emissions come from our use of power. And I think, you know, increasingly we're really seeing with accelerated climate change the nexus between energy and water to be an elevated concern. So, you know, Metropolitan was created through the development of the Colorado River Aqueduct. And much of that is powered by hydroelectric energy from Hoover Dam and the Parker Dam. And what we're seeing with the decreasing levels in our reservoirs is we are experiencing decreased levels of power coming from those facilities. And so it's really forcing us to look at additional options on our aqueduct for not just new energy sources, but green power. And so we have, you know, some land along the aqueduct. So we're looking at all sorts of different opportunities to either build renewable energy and storage, or to work with renewable energy developers to build projects. We recently put out a request for statements of interest related to 7 of the properties that we own out in the desert, just asking the industry who has ideas for renewable energy and storage on these properties. And so we're evaluating those responses now. So they're and you know, we're looking at batteries, but we're also looking at things like pump storage. And so I think there's a real synergy here between what the energy sector is looking at and the water sector, because we also are really going to rely on that grid, and we need to ensure that as we're all electrifying a lot of our fleets and buildings, that we have the grid stability that we need in order to continue to deliver drinking water to our 19 million customers.
Now, what about the transportation sector? What are you thinking in terms of electrification and clean fuel? Michelle, can you speak a little bit to that?
Sure. So we've already transitioned our fleet to renewable diesel, which we saw as a fairly small lift compared to having to buy a bunch of new locomotives to sort of transition from ultra-low sulfur diesel to renewable diesel. And we did a test before we went through that process, and it has miraculously been very seamless. And, you know, thus far we haven't had any issues, and we've been now fully using renewable diesel for well over a year now. You know, as far as what we see for our facilities, I mean, that's a big part of this effort to plan for zero emissions, is recognizing that we're going to need to have potentially an ability to perhaps generate hydrogen or store hydrogen, or you know, have a significant amount of power available at our facilities for charging. So those are all sort of issues that we're tracking, and we're sort of trying to thread the needle between looking at the facilities and the infrastructure piece along with the vehicle, what's available from a vehicle technology side as well. But yeah, there will certainly be a lot of effort that will go into trying to, come up with a holistic package for, what not only the vehicle onboarding will look like, but what the requirements will be for charging and fueling.
Now, Heather, you mentioned problems with brown and blackouts. If you're powered by electricity, that's a big problem. Can you speak a little bit about what your thinking is?
Sure. Well, first of all, I mentioned earlier, LA Metro is I think really on the cutting edge of the EV bus, the zero emission bus transition. So we're in the process of transitioning our fleet of like 2,200 buses to EVs, and it's a multi-billion-dollar program. We are, I think, leading the way in terms of really pushing technology, pardon me, to make sure that our batteries can, that our buses can serve their entire routes. So as an example, on high heat days, right, if you're running the AC, your battery doesn't last as long. So we're having to do things like installing in-route charging in some places, which makes the whole program more expensive. We're hoping that technology will catch up quickly, so that we can have, the service that, we need to be able to serve all of our customers. We're also looking to provide more public charging. We're going to be applying, along with the County of LA and the City of LA, for funding from the Charging and Fueling Infrastructure Grant that is open right now. At the federal level, we're pretty excited about that, to put chargers in a lot of our park and ride lots. And I think the most exciting thing happening right now, I think, is around heavy duty and trucking. So, I think Hillary Norton talked earlier today about the 710 and kind of the regional challenges there. A lot of pollution really impacted communities. At the same time, we've got to get goods out of the port because it's a major economic engine for the country. And so what you're seeing right now is the Biden administration actually nodding the approval that California is going to be able to regulate heavy-duty trucking in a way that we need to be able to do in order to really get the industry to get there. And so I think there's a corridor charging grant program that's part of the federal infrastructure bill, also open right now. I think there's going to be we're hopefully going to start to see charging come online along corridors like the 710, where trucks can charge at the same time that these incentives for zero emission trucks are also coming into the marketplace. And hopefully we'll start to see some real momentum there, because the heavy duty vehicles are a huge problem when it comes to pollution and emissions.
Thanks, Heather. We are coming towards the end of our panel, so I want to invite each panelist to share either one thing you're taking away or one thing you'd like the audience to take away. And we'll just start and go down the row here. Liz.
I think sort of in the spirit of this panel, I think we're all recognizing the sort of urgency of us to act in the face of accelerated climate change. And I think what all of us have come to realize is that even though we may be, in energy or in transportation or in water, that the myriad of climate hazards really impact us all. And so really thinking about how they cascade and compound the impacts on our infrastructure and our ability to serve our customers is something that we need to think about holistically.
I think, yes, to Liz's point, and I think to what Chris was trying to summarize earlier in terms of the fact that, all of these projects are very critical and important. I think from a transportation perspective, one of the messages I wanted to sort of share was something that I heard at a conference that I think was a good reminder. Is we talk a lot about zero emissions, but really for transit, a big piece of that is going to be getting people onto our trains, and that sort of mode shift being a critical part of the effort to really reduce emissions, is to ensure that our investments and our facilities are really being utilized to their fullest. And so that's a key part of all of this, is, certainly focusing on the propulsion side, but making sure that we actually get people on our trains and for Heather, on the buses as well. So
I think this panel was motivating. Although there's a lot of work to be done, it's motivating. It's clear that there's a transportation, energy, and water nexus, and we need to be working together. That being said, we are a state agency, so if you guys have any information that could help inform what we could fund in the future, that is really helpful, so happy to connect after.
Yeah, this is very exciting. We're experiencing a massive transformation of how we live, how we work, how we move around, how we live just in our society. And if that doesn't energize you guys, I mean, and that's why we're in public service, a lot of us here, is we want this change and we want to help facilitate this change for the better. So it's exciting to hear some of these cool projects. I didn't even know that we're moving along, but there's some serious thought going into what California is going to be and how California is going to be a leader for the future.
Well, I think what I'm happy to hear today is all the interagency coordination and the mention of that repeatedly. We need more of that because there's not one agency, not one profession that can address climate change. We all need to work together. And as a takeaway, I really want folks to think about green infrastructure as real infrastructure and think about climate positivity. We're trying to reach climate neutrality, but climate positivity is just as important because after we've all biking out there, there's still greenhouse gas emissions from the industrial age in the atmosphere that we still need to draw down. And so green infrastructure plays a huge part in that. And so start thinking about it as part of your infrastructure projects.
Thank you. I just want to thank Ken for putting this conference together and assembling an almost all-female panel. So that's, that's the opposite of the dreaded mantle. And I just wanted to echo as well that I didn't talk about nature-based solutions at all during my comments, but I really also agree with Anna that, I mean, there are a lot of incredible nature-based ways to handle the issues that we're dealing with, and we need to, I think, always start from those solutions. So thank you, Aurora.
Thanks, Heather. And I'll just add one last point, echoing what I believe it was, I might get her name wrong, but she was on the previous panel. Is it Hillary? Hillary said that we have a lot of public agency representatives here on the panel, but the private sector is very important. I teach in an MBA program, and so I work with working professionals from all across the private sector, and there are incredible, innovative solutions and energy to partner from the private sector. Also, thank you to Matt on the previous panel who mentioned the importance of higher education. All of society working together to solve these problems. And thank you to the amazing panelists. This was a lot of fun.